the way motivation, I wanted to bring in some different voices to this talk and to the motivation. I thought this worked for this course. This is a little thing from the Catholic tradition, and it's from a book called Desert to Cloister, From Desert to Cloister. And it says, as the monastic devotes his energies to living an authentic life, he becomes aware that the principal danger to his vocation is not the world, which is constantly calling him back, nor the flesh, I might say the body, which has its own urgent priorities, nor even the varied temptations of what the devil, they call the devil, what we would say of various temptations, things that come up in the mind. The great enemy is self-will. I think they sometimes mean here self-centeredness, but also they go on and say the ego, wanting to maintain full control over his life and in his environment. Sounds like autonomy. And the cupidity that lacks a sensitivity to any need or desire but his own. In its grossest form, self-will is abhorrent to those around us, and so it has to be disguised. Nobody likes to be called selfish. Because we like to think of ourselves as virtuous, vices rarely present themselves in their true colors. Major temptations will often present themselves under the semblance of a higher good, or as the avoidance of an undesirable outcome. You will not die, the serpent said to Eve, but you will be like one of the gods. And so the greatest temptation faced by the inexperienced monk or monastic is to allow himself to be drawn away from the austere singularity of his ideal toward the alluring mirage of some alternative. I would be better off as a preacher or a pastor or the father of a Christian family. I would be better off joining Oxfam America or something, When the monastic begins to gain pace and the work of purification begins to bite, the great temptation is to terminate the process and to seek change. It is in facing dilemmas like these that counsel is most important and most resisted. So this really makes me aware that monastics of all traditions have a lot in common, a lot we can learn from each other. And in fact, when we were setting up the Abbey, Venerable was looking at St. Benedict's rules, which eventually these kind of thoughts grew into. And so we need reliable guides, and for us it's the Buddha. He's our main teacher. So we see ourselves as like patients of this doctor, the Buddha. So they point very strongly to self-centeredness as being a huge obstacle, getting us in all kinds of trouble and disguising itself. So whether we are reaching for our individual liberation or for full awakening, we want to be on guard. We want to work against these things that will derail us. And so what we're actually going to talk about today is joy, living joyfully together. So parts of this teaching come from this little book by Thich Nhat Hanh. And so I titled this talk, Living Joyfully Together, and years ago in 2009, I had put together a talk on this. Now it's like completely different. Back then I was thinking, living joyfully together. And now I realized I'm thinking, living joyfully together. and I can see, in not having looked at this material so closely since 2009, that I've grown and I've understood more. But in terms of that part, living joyfully together, what I realize now is that we're all responsible for our own state of mind, including our joy. And so back at that time, Venerable Chodron's, I was relying on her joyous effort, and she used to really try to get me to smile. She just went out of her way to try to make me smile and laugh. And finally she had to give up. And I had to just work it out for myself, find out how to be a doctor to my own mind. So some of the main themes that we're going to explore in this I'm going to share about is learning about Dharma joy, I guess I would say, and then learning about living in harmony, which is a central value of living together in a Sangha community. So the kind of joy that we talk about in Buddhism, or happiness, or even the peace, we're not looking for something that's, well, you might say, low-grade happiness. We're actually learning about Dharma joy and eventually hoping to become liberated and have a kind of peace for ourselves and for others. And then in terms of fostering a community, the first thing I wanted to talk about were these 6 harmonies, just briefly, just to give an idea of what contributes to joy in a monastic community and what the Buddha taught about this, because these were actually taught by the Buddha. They weren't exactly called that. The translation was the 6 principles of cordiality, but they're in the middle length discourses and Sutta 108, 104. But basically we learn these as the 6 harmonies. And I was speaking with Venerable Losung about this some time ago, and I realized how important it is that we have these 6. Why a Sangha community works and lasts. Why has it lasted for thousands of years? These are ways of kind of contributing to harmony in a community that help us, both the whole community and every individual within it. So you can say, like, the purpose of a monastic, being, keeping the Vinaya and the monastic discipline, really, as Venerable so forcefully taught last time, it's to attain nirvana. And in the Mahayana, parinirvana, you become a Buddha. But in the short term, in the temporary kind of goals that we have, we really are trying to create a community that can facilitate each of the individual members, and so that everyone can go forward towards enlightenment or nirvana. So these 6 harmonies are spoken of to help us to develop love, care for each other, respect, kind of cohesion, you might say, concord, unity. They help to generate affection and respect among Sangha members, and help to prevent disputes. It can be the antidote for them. And so in stories I've heard of other intentional communities, they don't usually have these 6, and lots of times things fall apart. So I think these are really ingredients that you can find in the Sangha. So the first one, we'll just go through them briefly, is to be harmonious physically. So this is respecting the physical well-being of everyone in the Sangha, not harming other people physically, taking care of them when they're sick, just in general taking care of each other. And in a more positive way that could be said, and I think this is how it's said in the sutta, it's perform physical acts of loving kindness in public and private towards companions in the holy life, helping them to do things, caring for them when they're ill, and doing things without being asked. So that's the mindset in terms of physical. The second harmony is to be harmonious verbally. So of course this is more difficult than physical things, but in general we're trying to avoid the non-virtues of speech, not harming others with our words. So in the sutta it's essentially versed like this: perform verbal acts of loving kindness towards other companions in the holy life. So this is things like pointing out their good qualities, speaking gently, not talking behind people's back. But if we have to speak about someone's faults, we try to do this without any ill intent, any malevolence. I'm not saying that word right, malevolence. Is that right? It doesn't sound right. Without any ill will. No, we want to have the intention in mind to benefit the other person. So in that regard, we have to learn how to speak at the right time, in the way that can be heard, that they won't be embarrassed at a time when people are open. And there's a lot to learn about that. the third harmony is to be harmonious mentally. And this is Venerable, when she taught about these, she said, this is a growing thing. So this is being realistic with this. Conflict does come up. And differences are natural, just like in our morning motivation that we do, or offering service prayer. It's natural. But having differences in opinion doesn't mean there have to be conflicts. And so this is a growing thing to learn how to work out that part of things, and it involves appreciating each other. So this in the sutta says, mental acts of loving kindness towards companions in the holy life. So this is a mind that is intent on benefiting others. And then the fourth harmony is to be harmonious in the precepts. And I think this is where a lot of intentional communities probably fall apart, because their lifestyles aren't matching well enough. So we observe the same precepts, and within a particular monastery, the same guidelines. And so we're doing this together. And that means, and you can feel it, when someone breaks the precepts, breaks the guidelines, it creates a certain level of disharmony. It's something it's kind of palpable, really. So that's one way of being harmonious. The fifth is to be harmonious in views. This is essentially referring to the Buddhist worldview. And this is actually the most important of the harmonies. This is said to give a lot of strength and energy and support. And in the right view, you could say, is really in the Buddhist teachings that we're trying to destroy dukkha, or suffering, or dissatisfaction. So this is a very unifying principle and quality in the Sangha. And the last one is to be harmonious in welfare. And basically this means that we share the various requisites that we have. And ideally in a monastic community, people don't really own much of anything. You don't have many private possessions. And in actuality, you can see that everything that we have here doesn't come to us because of our work. It comes to us because of people's kindness. That's what we want to hold in mind on this. We don't really own these things. All these things are offered due to the kindness of other people. So in a sense, the way I think of this is like it's like the Sangha and monastic life as being like an intentional community. It's based on these harmonies. And so I would say at the Abbey, we're trying to foster a very healthy community. People that are like balanced, well-being. And we try to have a combination of study, meditation, and service, which is really common in most monasteries of any religion, from what I've been told. To do this, we need to have a community that has really good communication skills and ways to resolve like conflict resolution skills. We have to develop those. We have to have individuals who are willing to live simply. And we have to be all cultivating our ethical conduct, our love, our compassion, wisdom, and joy. And this in itself, just doing that is an inspiration to others, and that we can see from living here. So I would say that as an overall intention, as Venerable said the other day, it's actually nirvana, whether it's of your own liberation or of full awakening. And so, of course, to do that, we share this worldview, and in our tradition, we kind of encapsulate it as the three principal aspects of the path. We have this kind of feeling of renunciation to become a monastic, or anyone involved, that has that as a goal. But you have to have the wish to be free of suffering. It's kind of a type of self-compassion, really. And not just the wish, but also knowing that that's possible. Or else you wouldn't make the effort. You have to have some, we don't have to have, we don't have usually at the beginning full belief, but we have to have some interest and some idea that this is possible. And then the second one is the bodhicitta. So this is really, if you just think of how wonderful it would be not to be yoked by and burdened by the self-centeredness that just pops up all day long. Me, I, mine, all day long. Just think of being free of that and imagine what our heart would be like, how expansive we would be. So this is one of the principles that we aspire to. And then wisdom. And of course, that's of two main things, of karma, how things, how what we do matters, how conventional reality works. And then the nature of reality. And I always think of that as like a scouring pad. We develop this scouring pad. We have the realization of emptiness like a scouring pad, and we're going to clean our mind with it. Does that make any sense to you? A scouring pad, you know? Scouring pad is something you clean hard stains with on dishes, like that metal thing above the sink. So we have this tool at our disposal that we then cleanse our minds with. So that's, in a sense, part of our worldview, and then how we go about it is the three higher trainings: ethical conduct, concentration, and wisdom. So in terms of ethical conduct, that of course includes our precepts. So then you could say that our job, what is our main purpose as a monastic, as Venerable was saying yesterday, is to have the flourishing of the Buddha Dharma. And one way we translate that here is the slogan at the Abbey, I think, is pretty much that: creating peace in a chaotic world. Because that's the purpose of the Dharma, is to lead to peace. So His Holiness said that the flourishing of the Buddha's teachings, which is kind of our job, right, in a particular place is determined by the existence of fully ordained monks and nuns, and male and female lay practitioners. Thus, the existence of monks and nuns and the practice of Vinaya, the Buddhist monastic discipline, are very important. So what does that really mean? If you enter this life, what does that mean? It means that as an individual, you have to practice the Dharma in a way that you learn to embody it. I used to think, it's just, my job here is to make it so Venerable children can write books, But that's not the job of a monastic. The job of a monastic is to kind of like become the Dharma in a sense. As in our own little way, we have to try to embody it as individuals. And then as a community, our main goal is to be harmonious, because this is what fosters, like it says in our Pasada, in the rite that we do every 2 weeks, the confession that we just did the other day. There's a line in there that talks about that the whole the best way to nirvana is to have a harmonious Sangha. That's what it boils down to. So that's what we're trying to be, is a group of like-minded people who are supporting each other. We have a shared vision, this Buddhist worldview, and we're supporting each other. And these, what I would say would be, if you think about it, our deepest aspirations. I mean, what is more important? What is going to be more beneficial? So we were a little struggling with this, holding this kind of energy in the early years. And so every morning when you recite the monastic mind motivation, you might imagine a group of fledgling monastics who were trying to hold the energy of monasticism. But when all these guests came, it was a little hard for us to do. So we invited Venerable children to write this prayer, the monastic mind motivation, that we read every morning. And so next time you read it, think about the words, because it kind of encapsulates what we've been talking about here, what we're trying to do. Whether we're lay practitioners, whether we're monastics, it's kind of encapsulating the Buddhist worldview and the approach and the motivation that we're taking. So that's something that we work ourselves into. And so I wanted to share, mostly I want to talk about some things from Thich Nhat Hanh, but I wanted to share first my own reflections on harmony and joy in the community. And there are so many things. I had to narrow it down. There are so many things that contribute to this. So I just picked out a few. And the first started before I even moved here. And it was studying the Lam Rim and learning about the 10 non-virtues. And for I think a year and a half, I reflected on those every day. And I looked at my life, and just by doing that, without me doing anything else, this whole level of confusion in my life dropped away. So for me, that was something I'll never forget, and it was like this first kind of step, because you have to Buddhism is something that you do from the inside out, right? And so that was helpful, because the way things are organized in the world and the way things happen is very confusing and hard to make any sense of. And having the Buddhist worldview, in which, in a sense, these 10 virtues help me to learn about, help me to understand, like, how just to manage my life in this society, I would say. So that was the first step for me, in having more joy and maybe more peace of mind. Then as I move here, some of the main things that I find helpful and some of the things I do, let's see. I'd say I do these on a daily basis. The ones I picked out currently, they're things I focus on every day. The first thing is I know I need to change. And so I have a mantra commitment that I do every day, and I use this one mantra for one of the first things I do in the morning. Sometimes on the way to the hall, I'm doing this mantra and I'm thinking, I need to change, I need to change, I need to change. Who's the one who needs to change? I need to change, I need to change. Sometimes I change it to heal, like it's a healing, because when we actually learn these teachings, we're actually healing ourselves, or making our mind more wholesome and healing it. So that's the first perspective. And then the other one is the four immeasurables, and especially the way that Venerable taught them years ago from the Pali perspective, because they're more from this perspective of the other person. And so these are things that I aspire to and to put into practice. And so, like, just to explain, like, say if I find myself reacting to somebody, what I often do is I try to remember the first one, which is loving kindness. And that's your basic stance in life, being friendly to others. So when I'm reacting, I'm obviously not being friendly, so I have to go back. What is my basic stance in life? Friendliness, being friendly to other people. And so that helps me to start working on my mind. And then the second one, the compassion, then I remind myself of that, and I think, wow, maybe this other person is suffering. Maybe I could think about this differently. Try to recognize the suffering that's going on in the exchange, and that helps me. Or if I'm not reacting to something, or like the third one, rejoicing, when other people are doing well, just rejoice, and that's something that we don't think about enough. And so we can be thinking about a lot of other things when people have circumstances that we want, or whatever, different states of mind come up, but that's something we can train ourselves in. So I think I do that one the least. But the fourth one I do quite a bit, which is the equanimity. And to me, this has been quite helpful in the sense of me, I'm activity-oriented. I need something to do. I'm always wanting to do. That's my predisposition. So when you can't help somebody, it always was kind of a real major bummer in my life. And I realized, but there is something you can do. Because if you can make your mind equanimous, meaning still having a feeling of affection for this other person and keeping the door open, that kind of mind, that means that when the circumstances change, you'll be in a good position to help somebody that you actually can't help at this time. I found that quite distressing in my life of, wanting to be able to help people and not really knowing how, or things I'm doing not working, and getting, despondent about that. And now I have a completely different take on this, like more understanding of who's got what responsibility in this situation for what, and where am I taking on theirs, and where am I not taking care of myself, and all of that kind of stuff. So these four things are at least three of the four are something that come up often, if not daily. Another thing that's helped me a lot early on, and is now is just kind of embedded in, is knowing how important motivation is, but knowing that you can change your motivation. And so even my moving here, I thought about later, over some time, and I thought, wow, I really had mixed motivations about moving here. A lot of things we have mixed motivations for, but that's not the end of the story. We can clean them up. We can recognize the things that really aren't so wholesome, and just, work on changing those things. And that brings, a lot more peace in the mind, a lot more joy to life. So that's possible, not being so self-serving. And then a big chunk of what happens on a daily basis, and you've been kind of getting bombarded with probably, is learning how to identify and work with afflictions. And so that's a topic unto itself. So this I'll just pass out to, if you're in the community, I can send it to you digitally if there aren't enough. This is just for you. If you're like me, when I was doing this in 2009, Venerable gave this talk in 2009, and she went over Nagarjuna's, she went over generosity and how generosity can be used to get rid of the afflictions. It was a teaching from the Chinese canon on the Nagarjuna. And at that stage, and like many people who, are, when you first really start practicing in a setting that's kind of this intense maybe, or this concentrated or focused, I was like, I didn't really know what all my afflictions were. I had to figure out what is going on inside of this mind and what's happening here. And a lot of times I had to work backwards from the antidote to figure out what in the heck the affliction was, because I didn't really know. And so I used to sit there in the meditation hall, and I used to have something really bothering me, and I would read through this, and I would just start applying the antidotes and see which I worked it backwards to figure it out, because I was like, I've gotten better since 2009, but I found this really helpful. And also, I also found it really helpful for jealousy, which I wasn't able to get the standard thing of rejoicing to work. It just didn't work for me, and this one in here did. So, I learned a lot by doing this, so I wanted to share that. So we have to learn how to identify our afflictions. And by the way, this is from Sharing the Dharma Day, October 18th, 2009, so you can listen to the talk. And that's just the Cliff Notes. Okay, so we have to learn how to identify our afflictions, and then we have to work on the biggest ones first. You can't do everything at once. You just start with the biggest ones. And then in doing that, you fall down a lot. So it was very helpful for me to recognize that falling down isn't the problem. We make mistakes. We make mistakes all the time. And that's really not the problem. The problem is staying down, which is like wallowing. And I found that I used to do that, and it took me a long time to get out of afflictions because I was just like wallowing in them. I wasn't pulling myself out. I was hard on myself for having fallen down, but that's not the problem. Shantideva taught me that. And in this Catholic discernment little excerpt, it says like this, it's very well put. Every newcomer needs to learn the art of spiritual discernment, to distinguish between what is real and life-giving and what is merely illusory and will ultimately lead nowhere. Discernment is learned by practice, and practice involves making many mistakes. So that's pretty much the way it is, I would say. Very well put. Okay, and then the last one, which I'll just say it the way I always say it to myself, is don't let go of the tail of the comet. Hold on to the tail of the comet, That makes sense to me, because one of the first things I learned here, I was here like a week or two. We went out to dinner with a local person who's very wise, with Venerable. The only one of the few times I've ever gone to a restaurant in this town. Venerable, Simke, and myself, neither of us were ordained, and this woman. And she told us about venerable children. Hold on to the tail of that comet. That stuck, because we always had a hard time keeping up with her as it was. But what I'm trying to say is that we have to, in our practice, we need to learn what a qualified spiritual teacher or mentor is. And we have to learn, and have one. And we have to learn what it means to be a qualified disciple or student. And we cultivate that within ourselves. And so, to me, when I say holding on to the tail of the comet, it represents all of that. Having a teacher is just, to me, it's so important, because you have role models, and then that gives you a lot of confidence that you wouldn't have otherwise, because you see, like anyone who's met His Holiness, you see what's possible. So this is very, very important. And then, regarding being a qualified student, what does that mean? Well, there's three main points. One is that we have to be open-minded, essentially. And anytime we're trying to learn, if we aren't open-minded, we're not really going to learn. And then we have to have a certain kind of intelligence where we can at least learn and try to figure out what's appropriate and what isn't, or what's right and wrong. That kind of intelligence they're talking about. And then some kind of enthusiasm, interest in the topic. That's the thing that we don't always have, all three of those. And we have to cultivate those within ourselves. Okay, so then how do we get into trouble? I find this teaching helpful. We want to be joyful, we want to be peaceful, we want not to have afflictions ruling our mind, and there they are. and we're creating harm and getting ourselves in all kinds of trouble. And basically, this relates to kind of what you might say, kind of different 4 ways that we have errors in our ethics. It's like that. And these are big categories. So one, which I noticed came up a little bit even during this program, not knowing what's to be abandoned and what is to be practiced. That's like a tall lesson that we're learning. What is the cause of happiness from the Buddhist standpoint? We're talking about joy, happiness, right? The cause is virtue. So we have to know what to adopt and what to abandon. And so in that way, it's important to know what the 10 non-virtues are and what the 10 virtues are and what precepts you have that you hold and things like that. Some people, if we don't know about all those things, which we wouldn't know right away when you first take precepts, you have to learn about them later. So you have to learn about the 10 non-virtues, learn about your precepts and study them, know what kind of commitments and pledges you've taken. That's a matter of kind of a study. And then the second thing, so the first one is not knowing what to abandon, what to adopt. It's a basic thing in Buddhist practice, what to adopt, what to abandon. And then the second thing is this lack of respect. What for what? Here we're talking mostly about the precepts in terms of ethics. So you could think, wow, maybe ethical conduct isn't that important. A lot of people feel that way. Life's random, doesn't matter. And so we have to develop some kind of conviction in the purpose of our precepts. And this is a lot of times done by looking at the advantages and disadvantages of things. So like, for instance, we talk in Buddhism about the karmic result of killing is a short life. So harming others is going to eventually bounce back on us and make us unhappy. Whereas when we're protecting life, that's going to bounce back on us too and give us a long life in the future. So, thinking in this way, we'll develop more respect for things because we see the advantages and the disadvantages of things. So when you do that, maybe you've had this experience. As you start to kind of, you might say, clean up your act ethically, then you can sit on the cushion with more peace in your mind. You don't have all this stuff disturbing your mind all the time. Your mind has more like a coolness to it. You don't have all this kind of remorse that can come up and regret, that's a negative kind of regret. You just don't have all this stuff you have to process. It's really a lot nicer. And then the reverse side of that is look at experiences in your life where you've practiced virtue and you see what kind of delight it brings. So we can create for ourselves our own peace, our own delight by being constructive, by being virtuous. And so this gives us some kind of respect for virtue, for our preceptor, for our precepts, for the people we live with who are all going in this direction of virtue. And Venerable Chodron has said it's good to think of the precepts in our mind stream as representing the Buddha to help us not to be indifferent towards them. Because sometimes small things we think don't matter, but that's not what the Buddha taught. So to think of the precepts as the Buddha kind of lends more weight for things that you might think don't matter. It's just kind of a way to work with the mind, I suppose. And the third one is carelessness, which I see in my mind. And it's this thing of where you're not really monitoring yourself very well. We know what the non-virtues are, we know what our precepts are, but we just kind of ignore it. We don't care. So what is that from? That's a mind that lacks integrity, or it lacks consideration for others. And these are really important and crucial, mental factors, aspects of the mind that we want to recognize. It's not, for me, this was a big turning point in living here when I was just like a pressure cooker, not really learning about the afflictions, but not really having a grasp of the antidotes. I was struggling for like a year and a half. My friends from afar, Tanya in particular, says, every time I came, you were like this. You were like a pressure cooker all the time. And it was true. It was. I didn't learn I was seeing all this stuff when I didn't have the tools for it yet. My joke was always like, somebody gave me once this little, beautiful little fan. It was like this big and it had all these colors, right? I loved it. I gave it away pretty quickly, but it was really beautiful. It was like in 2007, I think, or 6 or something, maybe even 5, somebody gave me that. And I just thought it was so beautiful. And I always thought of my Dharma practice like that, this beautiful little fan. Unfortunately, my afflictions were like a hurricane, and I was just getting trounced all the time. So, there was that. So, so we have to learn about, when I learned about integrity, that helped me a lot. And why did it help me? It's because I realized I had these values and that I couldn't live up to them. And I realized that was okay. The thing is to aspire. There was an inmate who wrote a beautiful piece that's on our website who said, I'm not a good Buddhist because I can do all these things. I'm a good Buddhist because I aspire to. And then Gandhi supported this same thing, the same idea, and it was really helpful to my mind to realize I fall short a lot. It's like I make mistakes a lot. Now I can accept it more easily, but at the time when you first see stuff, it's kind of like, not so easy. So that was helpful to me because I realized, wow, I do have integrity. I have these values and I can respect myself for that. And then I can recognize when I don't have integrity and I'm not living up to my values and not make it so heavy. Just recognize what I'm doing. Because if we're not caring, when, like, say we don't have any consideration for others, for example, then, or when the mind is lacking this kind of integrity, which we often have, then we'll just easily follow any impulsive thought. And that doesn't lead to happiness. Rarely. I was surprised. His Holiness said once, spontaneity does not lead to good things. And I was always taught in my life it was really good to be spontaneous. So I was like, are you sure? I had to really look at that one. And I would have to say, impulsive thoughts don't usually lead me in a good direction. You can check it out. You have to check it out for yourself. So what do? There's antidotes, right? For each of these, I've presented antidotes without using the word maybe, but in this one we have to learn how to be more careful, more conscientious. For me, it usually means slowing down. We have to be mindful of our precepts, how we're talking, whatever, so that we're aware of our body, our speech, and our mind. And then we can modify what's happening there. And then the last one is strong afflictions. So this is another way where we run into ethical errors, is the afflictions are just too strong. We can't quite, they're stronger than, they're like, I have the little fan, and it's coming in like a hurricane, right? They're just strong. And so that's how it is. When our mind is unsubdued, then sometime, and this is usually, we don't have enough mindfulness, we don't have enough introspective awareness, our afflictions can overwhelm us. So in that sense, then they're in control and running the show, right? So this is why Shantideva says, the first verse in Guarding Alertness, chapter 5, says, those who wish to guard their practice should very attentively guard their minds. For those who do not guard their minds will be unable to guard their practice. So this is kind of what it's talking about here. And this is what we have to try to develop. And he says it then again in chapter 8, the meditation chapter, the very first verse, right after the verse on developing joyous effort, he says, having developed enthusiasm in this way, or joyous effort, I should place my mind in concentration. For one whose mind is distracted dwells between the fangs of disturbing conceptions, between the fangs of afflictions. So when you're distracted, when you're on automatic, when you're just not really paying attention to the actions of your body, speech, and mind, you can just expect the afflictions are going to invade. You know, you have the conditions where they're going to be like, it's easy. So we have to learn the antidotes, and we have to learn the antidotes to the various afflictions as well. So the main things that help us with the afflictions, I mean, there's tons to learn, but we have to have these mental factors: mindfulness, being aware of what we're trying to do, then introspection, you could say, are we doing that? And then this self-respect or integrity that gives us this kind of like the values that we're trying to live by, and then consideration for others. These are the 4 factors that they say shut the doors to these transgressions that make us miserable. If you can't work on those, it would be very hard to be joyful. And that's what you see out in the world a lot of times. People who are just miserable, they're just drug around by the lack of these kind of mental factors. Okay, and then the last point of my own experience that I wanted to share is learning about optimism. I would say that I started off more as an idealist. And one who's idealistic is actually not realistic. So what happens is you fall to pessimism. It's better to be an optimist. And basically, it's hard to unpack that very briefly, but if you can just think of what is really realistic and what isn't. Optimism is realistic. Idealism is not realistic, and it's always going to doom you to going to pessimism. It makes you very discouraged. Things, you look at the world and you can just get like, it sucks, it's so bad, you can't stand it. But if you can find the things to be optimistic about, then you don't have to lose hope, because we need to have hope or we can't go forward. So you have to learn, and that I'll leave as your homework, because these things are whole topics unto themselves, and I'm just trying to give ideas. So that's some of the things that were main things that I found helpful that have made my life much more peaceful and happy here. And from my side, living joyfully together. I'm taking responsibility for my own joy, and then that can affect the people around me. It used to be living joyfully together. I was looking for my happiness outside, and that's usually not so reliable. But let's turn to Thich Nhat Hanh, this book, Joyfully Together, The Art of Building a Harmonious Community. And I like to share some of his ideas, because he's very beautiful. And I have to preface this in saying that I often turn to him when I need the gentle voice, but I'm realizing that when you listen to him, he's not always gentle. And some of that comes up here. So he's talking to monastics, and but he's very been very helpful for my practice. He's one of the people that drew me to Buddhism in the very beginning. So here he's talking about the Sangha. And he's saying the most precious work we can do as practitioners is to build Sangha or Dharma community. Most precious. This is our community of practice. And we trust it to support our deepest aspirations and to give us energy and inspiration. And that's really why a lot of us are here, because it helps. It's inspiring. We inspire each other. So any community or organization will benefit from practices, actual practices that enhance communication, mutual understanding, and support among the members. So he's very practical. They have ways in their community where they've looked at the traditional monastic practices that are like 2,700 years old, however old they are, and they've tried to refresh them. Look at them with fresh eyes and bring them to life and offer them to their community in a way that's inspiring and suitable in this day and age. So for us here, I think because everything is new, we don't have to refresh anything. We've just been creating things based on the Buddhist principles and the Buddhist rites. So we do every 2 weeks the confession that you did, the pasada. We do these other Buddhist rites, which are very meaningful for our community and help to lead to, I would say, joy within people, harmony, growth. We do purification practices. We do mind training. It's one of the main types of aspects of Tibetan Buddhism that we study here, and Lam Rim, which is the gradual path to awakening. Those two parts of Tibetan Buddhism, which are main things that we do, these are some of the practices that we actually use here. We also use one for more the psychological realm, which is the nonviolent communication. But this is based really on kind of like, I would say, our motivation. We have to make this determination that we want to live in harmony and be aware of what we're doing. So we have to actually commit ourselves to this life of trying to be joyful with each other, trying to be peaceful, trying to lead our lives towards freedom. I see that here. I would say harmony is one of the biggest values of our community, if not the most important one. It's been articulated and it's been talked about, and feeds how we do things. But then he goes on to help us in this regard. And he says that we have to recognize that we benefit from each other's strengths and we learn from each other's weaknesses. That's very true. We do benefit from each other's strengths and we do learn from each other's weaknesses. So he sees the Sangha as like a spiritual family and that we are connected. And we're connected by our views, our Dharma principles, and our various practices of like mindfulness and concentration and wisdom and insight and all that. So in a sense, he sees us as a family that's walking together on this path to liberation. And that's why he thinks that we need very concrete practices. We need intelligent and creative disciples that can help to continue this tradition and make it fresh and vital in the world. So I can see if you were in a country where it's been there for, 1,500 years. How long has Buddhism been in Vietnam? Long time. You might have to refresh things. Here we don't really have that problem. Everything is kind of newly created in the Western way in our culture. But even so, our practices, they're based on the same Buddhist principles, the same view, everything. I always think of as Buddhism as like the teachings are like the ingredients of food, and then you have different cuisines. So we all have the same food ingredients, and then we make different cuisines out of them. So it looks different in different places that you go. So a Sangha that becomes mature actually has a great deal of strength, and we help to protect each other, and we help each other with our practice. So by having a lot of people together, you can see that things that are difficult to do on your own become a lot easier to do. This is one of the great values of living in a community. Just think about the schedule that we follow. Would you be up every day? I would not be up every day. I can guarantee it. This has helped me tremendously. I would not get up this early. I would sleep a little longer. So it makes it easier. Things become natural. It's very natural for me to get up at this time, to sleep now than I do now. And so it's not so strenuous when you have a lot of people. Like many hands make light work, but also there's a kind of energy that comes together, like a collective energy. And Thich Nhat Hanh is saying that the practice of individual transformation is not easy, and it's especially not easy to do on your own. And I would add that big projects aren't easy to do on your own. It's not possible for one person to make the Dharma flourish. It takes a community. And that's why the Buddha created communities. But going back to this things about seeing strengths and weaknesses in each other, I thought what he said here, I've seen now, before this for me was more like a book report. Now I have like a number of more years to have seen what he was saying and see the truth of it. I think it's true. We see the strengths and the weaknesses of each other, and that creates a kind of collective insight within the community. So that means that he says it has strength, vitality, and wisdom. I would say, yeah, and what happens with that is that we pool our ideas, we pool our insights, we pool our strength, and then we can deal with things that come up, whether it's with an individual, whether it's with a project, whatever it is. So I've always liked this thing that Sakya Pandita said, that our eyes only look out, and so we need a mirror to see ourselves. And that's really, this is why this thing about strengths and weaknesses is so important. And I love the way that Thich Nhat Hanh says it. He says it like this: therefore, when you're praised, right, happy, or instructed by others, admonished, not so happy. Either one. When you're praised, when you're instructed by others, recognize that if we respond with pride and with the ego, we won't learn or progress. And then it's like, here's the biggest point. We need to hear the truth about ourselves as others see it. I feel like that's like a dart almost, We need to hear the truth about ourselves as others see it. That helps us to grow, and it also helps us to understand others. If they're right, we learn something about ourselves that we couldn't see. If they're wrong, we learn something about them that we might not have seen. Either way, it's a kind of like a win-win thing. It is possible to be that. So because each person is contributing to the energy of the community, it's important to make that energy both positive and stable, which I wasn't able to do. And I remember years ago, and I've never forgotten this, I think about this every time before I speak out loud in this kind of situation, or even setting a motivation in the hall, or whatever it is. She told me, Venerable said to me, be positive. Because I wasn't able to. She was like, you need to help me to turn and see. She actually gave me things to help me to realize how my thinking was so negative about things. You know, when it's that thing of, when the person walks in the room and they haven't even done or said anything and already you're having negative thoughts, that's on your side. That's on your side. And this, I'm talking years ago, but I had to learn that. To me, it just kind of was really like reality. They really are a jerk. I haven't made them into one. So the whole equanimity meditation of friend, enemy, and stranger. They are a friend, they are an enemy, they are a stranger. I didn't designate it, that's just who they are. So, you have to learn these things. And then, when it's not so heavy and so solid like that, it's a little easier to be positive. So Thich Nhat Hanh goes on and says, when things don't go well, does that happen ever? Daily. Don't blame others, don't criticize them. Turn within and be mindful and be aware. Criticizing and blaming others takes away from the joy and the peace of the community. Yes, it doesn't work. It's a joy buster. Doesn't help. So we have to find ways to communicate that don't fall into criticism. It doesn't work very well. So in this sense, we're all contributing to the energy of the community. So if we want the community to be strong and stable and full of energy, we all have to contribute. And that even comes up in the smallest things. And for me, one of the biggest examples of that is when we are supposedly sitting silently or standing silently before a meal. To me, this is just such a great example of how every individual contributes to the feeling of the community in that moment. It's so apparent. If we're all there, no one's rushing in, no one's doing this, no one's doing that, there's this kind of peacefulness. And everyone's making that happen. So in that way, you could say by all of this, all of the things that he's talked about, that we actually support each other by our own practice. What I'm doing when I stand there affects the person next to me. And then you can say we're all connected too, because we're sharing the same vision. So then he brings up, what about difficult people? What do you do? And he says, it's just habit energy. So we like to make it into bad person, like, I don't like people. They're bad. We aren't separating out the person from their behaviors. It's just habit energy. That's what's going on. So he says we have to see with the eyes of love and compassion. And we have to see, that's the positive. But the harder part, we can try to do that. But the harder part, I think, is for us to see we have the same seeds. Whatever you're seeing in front of you that's disturbing your mind, we have the same seeds for that. It's a huge thing to realize. It's so freeing. That is a very freeing thing. So that helps us to see others in a positive light, even though they have shortcomings. No one's perfect. My friend at Sakya Monastery used to say, do they have to be perfect for you to love them? Are you going to wait for them to be perfect before you love them? As my friend used to always say. It's really good. So we have to be able to forgive people, which means dropping our anger, be open, and try to understand. So how do you love someone who's difficult? Of course, Thich Nhat Hanh, look deeply. I think he must have said that a million times. Try to see their situation clearly, see what they're caught in. And then that helps us to help understand. He's taught me that. You cannot love someone unless you understand them. And by doing these, by having these kind of reflections and working on our mind in this way, this helps to create harmony. And I would add to that it's important to try to keep the lines of communication open. That doesn't mean you're always in communication. That means from your side, because you have to sometimes, just to manage your own crazy mind, you have to separate and get yourself settled down, whatever. But you have to have this intention to have open lines of communication. And even if the other person isn't willing, your willingness affects things. And so when things change, you're ready to go. You won't. And I can see when I don't do that here. I find that quite painful when something's turned around and I'm not ready yet, and it's just they're ready, and I'm like shut down and not able to meet the person at their beautiful, genuine, sincere wanting to make things better, and I'm just like, rah. It's like that's not what I want to be. That's a moment of lack of integrity and lack of consideration for others and many other things going on. It would probably be a long list of things that are keeping me from having an open heart and a clear mind. That's one of my mantras. Sometimes I use that as a mantra. Open heart, clear mind. Open heart. Trying to get something out of my mind. So, and then Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to talk about skillful means. And I would say in this regard that we need role models. If we have like skilled teachers, that's one of the greatest benefits, I think, of living with your teacher. They say it's like being close to a fire, so it has the heats up. But the great benefit, I think, is having a role model. And here's where I see his not always so gentle Thich Nhat Hanh. He says, the medicine can be sweet or bitter, flexible or firm, but always with compassion. So we have to learn when to be gentle and when to be firm, when to be swift, when to wait to respond. And he says both gentle and fierce are needed. And loving kindness isn't always gentle. That's him. That's Thich Nhat Hanh speaking. I never thought I'd hear that because he always seems so gentle to me. But I think that he's probably able to get to the point when he needs to in a certain way for a certain individual. So this helps us to have a feeling more of inclusiveness with the people we live with, these kind of ideas. So we don't disparage people and make them feel like an outsider. And that's really a mind of equanimity, opening up our heart and accepting everyone. And of course we can't always do this, but this is like an aspiration, it's a direction of our practice. And then he kind of switches gears. I think I took this from different parts of the book, but this I see as like his warning, signs of danger ahead. He talks about leaving the community, leaving the Sangha. And I'll just read this part. When someone leaves the Sangha, it will be difficult for their practice to be successful. There's a Vietnamese saying, if the monk leaves the Sangha, the monk will be destroyed, just as if the tiger comes down from the mountain, the tiger will be caught. Tigers? Vietnam, I guess so. A practitioner may stand solid as the lord of the mountains and forests, and may speak as powerfully as the tiger roars. But if he leaves the Sangha body and goes out on his own, he is just like the tiger who has left the mountain. So I don't know a lot about that. I think I just take it as a warning. And I would have to reflect on that more and the people I've met and think about them. But I would say more, he unpacks this in a way that I find quite immediately useful. When we have difficulties and when we suffer, we have a tendency to want to run away. Is anyone here like that? I'm like that. I always joke I did a noondro and thinking about how many ways to leave the Abbey and how many ways to stay. I am pretty sure I've thought about it 100,000 times, but I don't think about it anymore. It really was just a habit of mind. He says we'll always want to run away and find a place where life will be better. And he says it's true in families and it's true in the Sangha. So this was helpful for me to read again because it's a habit I have had. He says, when you have problems with your teacher or the brothers or sisters in the Dharma, you want to run away, go somewhere else. And I would say, don't let this scare you, because it's just a habit of mine. But what he's saying is, we're running away from the present moment. And I know he speaks about the present moment a lot, but it really struck me this time how true that is. If you think about that moment, because I've had a lot of experience with this mind, you're running away from that state of mind. You just don't want that state of mind so bad that the only solution you can think of is, I'm out of here. And it's really that state of mind. I've worked with it much better because I just say, I kind of don't go through this rigmarole with myself anymore after so many times. I'm just like, I always recognize, I think of all these alternatives and they're just so hard. And I'm like, it would just be a lot easier to work this out. That's what it comes down to. So now I don't go through this litany of places. I've thought of every continent. I've thought of every situation. I don't bother with any of that because I know it's just a habit of mine. I just kind of like, this would be a lot easier just to work this out. And I just forego the whole runaway stuff more often now. But he says, leaving in these circumstances usually doesn't lead to success in the practice, especially for a monk or a nun. He says, wherever we are will be our place of practice. This is the great vow of monastics. I feel for myself personally that thought comes up, but luckily I don't follow those kinds of things. I found this to be something that I somehow had in this life. I don't know where I got this from, but I don't leave and run away from things. I certainly think about it. I usually try to go towards things in life, and I think that's helpful, because whatever you leave, you're going to eventually have to face that again. Whatever, you take your mind with you, right? So it's going to come up again. Anyway, so he says that in the Plum Village, Sangha building is the most important practice in their training program. That's how he feels about this. All of these kind of topics, everything we've been discussing here, building the Sangha, the flourishing of the Dharma, all of this, the most important practice. Why? Because for the Dharma to flourish in the future, and for us to be able to practice in the future, we have to build these Sangha communities. One practitioner can't do much on their own for the Buddha Dharma, and that's very, very true. So our job, so to speak, what we're trying to do as Dharma practitioners is to really contribute. He says, stand beautifully alongside the other trees in mindfulness and mindful manners. Put our heart into our studies and practice. Let go of little comforts. Let go of expecting someone to love us or be attentive to us. Let go of being angry when we're not treated equally or given our fair share. I like that one. Fair share. One time I was really bothered by thinking something wasn't fair here. And I usually don't do this, but I went and talked to Venerable about it because I couldn't work it out. And so she asked me to research what it meant to be fair. She gave me the answer, the result, what to look at. She said, fairness only bothers you when it affects you. It never bothers you when it affects someone else. It might a little, but not this much. Not so much that you can't put it down. So this is really just another ploy of the self-centered thought. Every time fair comes up. So I had to watch this for a long time, and I found out it didn't take me long. It's true. Every time. Self-centered thought, it's a crack up. So Thich Nhat Hanh is saying that these things aren't important on the spiritual path. And I wanted to share this expression from the Chinese tradition because they talked about, stand beautifully alongside the other trees. In the Chinese tradition, they have this notion of the Sangha, the ones who have more experience in the Sangha. They're like a forest of straight trees. And then the young ones are like young saplings. And they grow up straight because they're around all these straight trees. I think they have the same idea in Tibetan Buddhism for like a broom. A broom, all the little pieces of straw or whatever that is that make a broom, if you take one out, it's not really very strong. You can't really sweep a floor with it. But if you put them all together, it's very useful. We have these, metaphors or whatever. Okay. So the last thing I want to, just present. I'm just going to start because we're almost out of time. Is one thing he talks about in this book, and I'll just kind of present the bare bones of it, but what I really took from it is the sutra. It's in the Middle Length Discourse, and it's number 15. And it's a sutra that is very practical and valuable in terms of community life, in terms of the Sangha. And this was a sutra that Venerable Magliana taught. And he did this because he transformed himself, and he was very instrumental in building the Sangha at the time of the Buddha. So it was a sutra taught by him. And it's in the Pali and the Chinese canons. And at the time of the Buddha, it was recited as frequently as the Discourse on Mindfulness, which is a lot then. So this was very often recited. And its purpose is to help us to understand each other, to have more communication, to prevent or deal with the characteristics that cause a person to be isolated, feeling isolated when they're living in community. And then the method of this is well, you could do it this way, but actually I think this comes up naturally. Our eyes look out. We usually see others' faults, right? So he verses this in a much more positive way. He says, we look at ourselves and we compare ourselves with a friend on the path. Usually you don't even have to bother. You're already looking at other people and seeing their faults. But when that comes up, what do? Look deeply and see where we should go in our practice. If we find unskillful tendencies in our friend, we have to look at ourselves and see if we have these tendencies too. Whether they're strong in us or weak in us, we have to determine to transform ourselves. And he's saying that our own practice and our own transformation of this trait, whatever it is you're seeing, is the way to help our friend. So this is what was taught at the time of the Buddha. And then he gives the 17 reflections, of which I'm going to just cover one. The first one is about desire, which I'll skip. The second one is about pride, and there's 17. But I do want to do just the one on pride, and very brief, because it's something that we've been learning about, thinking about, and it's hard to recognize. So the sutta says, a monastic praises himself and criticizes others. And it goes on that you might have the state of mind where you think that no one is good enough to be your teacher or your elder. That's probably more frequent. Or you look at others and only see negative qualities. In truth, this is Thich Nhat Hanh speaking in his commentary, you haven't seen the same unwholesome quality in yourself. So we need to see our own positive qualities, and we need to cultivate them. But any tendency we have to praise ourselves, he says, is unbalanced, because we won't see our weaknesses and we'll cut ourselves off from sincere guidance. And this is completely explained in exactly the same way in Words of My Perfect Teacher. When I was trying to learn about pride and jealousy, which I only learned about when I moved here, age, whatever, decades old. So Patrul Rinpoche says, of all the negative emotions, pride and jealousy are the most difficult to recognize. Therefore, examine your mind minutely. Any feeling that there is something even any feeling that there is something even the least bit special about your own qualities. Any feeling that there's anything special about your own qualities, whether worldly or spiritual, will make you blind to your own faults and will make you unaware of other good qualities. So renounce pride and always take a low position. It's exactly what Thich Nhat Hanh is saying and what the sutra is saying. In truth, you haven't seen the same unwholesome quality in yourself. And not only that, you're not going to see other people's qualities. This is what pride does. It's a huge burden. And, with our afflictions, of course, we work on the biggest ones first, but eventually this will come up because we have all of these in our mind stream. So we have to learn to recognize them and work with them.